validation and checking. So it's going to be on the fly editing with Spin Legal tonight. Hey, welcome everybody to Spin Legal on September 11th, 2024. All right, let me just edit that one. You see, 11th.
Yep.
September 11th, 2024. There we go. With Angela Browne and Peter Giblett here. We're partners of Invictus Legal, and tonight we're going to be dealing with the topic of disability in the workplace. We're going to look at some statistics and legal rights for in employment. All right. So, okay. So remember, if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so on 905-688-5598. Or you can email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal, or you can do me at peter@weareinvictus.legal, or if you're going to be really happy, email us both. There we go. And our website is https://weareinvictus.legal. Okay, There we go. And welcome everybody. Some facts about disability in the workplace. So it's according to Statistics Canada, 20% of workers aged 25 to 64 and 32% of workers 65 to 74 are disabled.
Yep.
Okay. 20%. That seems higher than I expected.
Actually, some people are even saying it is even more higher than that, maybe up to 24, 25% of the population.
Is that because many people who are disabled won't admit it because, for example, signing on to ODSP is going to lose them, a lot of money, and the fear is that they'll get tossed out the workplace.
Yep, many do, and
I've met a few people over time, like a guy who's got a limp, a permanent limp on his leg. He walks with a stiff leg, always has done, and always will do. But he probably doesn't claim disability.
Yep. I've known people who do have some pretty serious disabilities, but they don't consider themselves as having a disability.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because they're in a situation where they're accommodated, where their disabilities don't interfere with their ability to do what they have to do.
Well, in some respects, it's about how we think about a person with a disability. Clearly, somebody, for example, somebody who 20 years ago had a car accident, lost the lower part of their left leg due to the car accident. Even if they can get around, they're still clearly a person with a disability.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. They may be able to completely function, do a very good job, maybe even be CEO of a corporation. But
you see some of these people at the Paralympics who lost some of their legs, but they can outdo a lot of us.
That's true. I mean, the sprint time. Could you do the sprint time? Sprint in that time? I couldn't. Yeah. I was never good at 100 meters anyway. I have to add that. I was a middle to long distance runner.
Yeah. And disability affects people in different ways, and you may consider yourself disabled in some circumstances, but not disabled in others.
Yeah.
Depending on the type of disability you're suffering from. And
okay.
Yeah.
So some other statistics. For persons with a disability, in 2022, 61.8% are employed and 30.4% are not. I was quite surprised at how high the number in employment was.
That's a little bit higher because of the pandemic and then the public service hiring a bunch of people. And some of them have got on because of their disability. And I don't know what that's going to play out over the long term, because prior to the pandemic, it was probably about 50%, at 47 to 50%.
That's what I would have expected, to be quite honest. I would have said, that if for persons with a disability, I'd expect probably 50% of them are employed.
Yeah.
And probably 50% of the other of those that are not employed are probably looking for a job, but 50% of the unemployed ones may well be on some form of permanent disability.
Yep. And just it depends, again, like this is something always that these gray areas intervene.
Yeah.
Like when you create a disability benefit, they always say, oh, well, you have to be unable to work.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody is completely unable to work. But I think what they should be is unable to compete in the existing marketplace.
I think that's an interesting question because, for example, my brother-in-law used to be a mechanic. You'd always find him under a car or something. Then, due to something he had with it, he had a blood clot or something in his leg, and for many years, so for about his last 10 years of his life, he was disabled, and they said, oh, he was not trainable for something else. But yet, I'd go around to his place. The average time I'd go around to his place, he'd be sitting at the computer, typing away, doing stuff. And like, why wasn't he trainable to something else? He could easily have been trainable to something else. And that may have elongated his life.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the things that they have found for people who are still engaged, actively engaged in either their employment or their business, or even certain hobbies that they particularly enjoy. Like your friend Dave Wheeler with the Kiwanis, all the stuff he does with the Kiwanis and his travel, that's keeping him alive and healthy.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And people do stay alive and healthy when they continue to work and participate.
Well, and continue to participate in things. Yeah, that's an important aspect always, that ability to participate. Okay. According to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, an average of 30 to 50% of all human rights complaints are on the ground of disability. I've got no date for this. They didn't publish when they found this. I'd probably be right in saying that this is an old statistic, probably.
Yeah, it's more closer to 50%.
Yeah.
It's probably closer to 50%, with the majority of the complaints tied to disability being with employment. But not all of them. Like some of them are housing services, transit.
Yeah, I know of a person who's claiming, basically, the lady who was disabled. She goes to work, and she notified, because of her disability, she notified her landlord that she's disabled and she needs a ramp out the front of her door because it's too high. The steps are too high. So what did they do? The landlord came around and made the steps even larger. Right? And of course that meant that she was disabled out of her job in time.
Yeah, let's slap the landlord with a big fine.
Well, of course, that was exactly what the paralegal involved did. He took the landlord to the HRTO.
Good for him.
Yeah. Okay. So employers, anything else on statistics? I couldn't see any other statistics.
Well, one of them too is that among people who aren't disabled, the employment rate is usually about 83%, if you want a comparison.
So we just said it was 61.8% for those with disabilities, and you're saying it's 80-odd% for those without.
Yeah. And for some disabilities, unemployment could be as much as 80 to 90%.
I was going to say that clearly,
particularly mental health, cognitive, and brain injury.
If the job involves, for example, let's say building a car, where you're putting parts together into a car and you're screwing a bolt into, your day is spent screwing a bolt in. But your position as a disabled worker may be untenable in certain circumstances. Right? I'm not saying that every job on the line is untenable. I'm just saying certain of them are, right? Yep. And the point being is that there can be some difficulties with certain jobs about getting.
It depends, really. Again, like if somebody has if their disability is primarily cognitive, or they are hearing impaired, or if they have like something like that, they could still do a lot of physical work the same way.
Well, if you're hearing impaired, you can certainly, there's nothing to stop you responding to emails,
Yeah, they
doing a
could
clerical
emails,
job.
or you can use teletype. You can use different types of ways of communication, and sign language.
Yeah.
And then if you're just hard of hearing, captioning is good. There's a lot of different ways
The
of
only,
accommodating people who are deaf and hard of hearing.
there might be, though, some difficulty as to you're going up to a person and who's in accounting and has hearing disability, and you're asking, when will my check be ready? Of course, when you're physically asking, when will my check be ready, there's not a device, like an email or teletype type system available to type that in. And that could probably be where there's greater communication issues.
Yep, exactly. And then this is how you work in a workplace to make sure people understand in terms of communication and cross communication, to make sure that things are equalized among the population. So if you got a deaf person in accounting and this person otherwise does a fabulous job, but people want to know, people are trained to email, send them by email.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, that was one incident I did know of a person. I used a live example, somebody I knew who was like that. And the rule was there in that particular workplace. Mary will happily process your checks when you need them. Just tell her at least 10 minutes in advance that you're coming for a check.
Yep. Yep. Just
Right?
say, I'll be arriving for my check at 10 to 5.
Yep. Yep.
Right. And then right now it's 20 to 5.
Yeah, exactly. And very often in that particular job, she dealt with expense checks and things like that, not pay, not your paycheck.
Yeah.
She dealt
Yeah.
with expenses and
And
things
then
that
what you
needed
do is
pay.
then you just upload your expense
Yeah,
check, and then
yeah,
out comes a check, right?
yeah, exactly.
With accounting. Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
various types of things. That's part of your accounts payable and accounts
Well,
receivable,
and
payroll.
the thing about that, of course, is that she was actually dealing with just the checks. There was a whole process behind, your ability to get the check, but you already knew that you were going to get $197.67 before you go into accounting, because all of that has all been checked off and you've got an email.
Yep.
Now what you need to do is say to Mary, hey, Mary, I'm going to be there at 10 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you need to say, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a comment. Hi, everybody, from Robert.
Hi. Hi, Robert. How you doing? I know we're doing the late great spin legal today.
Yeah, we're slow and behind the time. Yeah.
Yep. Because
Okay.
we had to eat.
Okay, so we've just said, okay, so on average,
That's just an example. Okay. That's just an example of how workplaces are organized. Okay? And they have to be organized that way. These are not expensive accommodations. Right?
well, I
They're
was
just
going to
ways
say
of doing things to help the person who has a disability to be able to do their job on a
most
basis.
accommodations are not, because most, that particular individual, as I said, one I knew, it was just make sure that you send an email 10 minutes in advance.
Yeah, exactly. Very simple. Most accommodations would cost the employer under $500.
I doubt that even cost her $500.
Yeah.
That was
Most things
placing
don't
the
even
emphasis.
cost, many of them don't even cost anything.
Yeah,
But
and that was placing the
employers,
emphasis upon the person receiving the check, to basically say, I'm going to be there at a certain time, right?
there's a lot of things that employers have to do in terms of preparing for a workplace. And this is what we talked about. I was sitting on one of the first AODA Employment Standards Development Committee. And a lot of this was focused on duty to accommodate and other issues around employment. And this was one of the things they talked about, is how to prepare a workplace to bring in employees, right? Potentially with a disability.
Yeah. Okay. So that's an important aspect. So
One of the things I tell
they
people,
have a duty to accommodate.
if you're serving the public, make sure you're on a bus route. Make sure you're near a stop-off station for people who are using paratransit. Make sure you have some somewhat decent parking nearby. And also make sure that you have an elevator in your building if you're not on the ground floor and your building is accessible.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of that, in Ontario, of course, there is no duty for commercial landlords to build elevators in buildings. So it may well be possible that the only way you can accommodate disabled people is through accommodations on the ground floor.
Yeah, many
For
times that is. Yeah,
wheelchair disabled, because remember, people who are blind, people who are hard of hearing can likely work on any floor.
yeah. And the thing is to remember that when you're doing things, and if even if it even if you have to go onto another floor or if you have to find a building with an elevator, this is what I try to tell people who are serving the public, particularly when the public that you serve can possibly include a disproportionate number of people with disabilities. Senior services, financial advising, legal services,
Mm,
psychotherapy. Even if you're in psychotherapy and you're trying to serve people, because many people who come for psychotherapy, many of them have various types of issues. And your building has to be where anybody can go in and get the same service, the same experience as anybody else without a disability.
okay, so we're talking there about a duty to accommodate. I'm looking out the window right now, and there's a bank opposite us, and they have a ramp. Possibly that bank doesn't even have any disabled employees, but they do potentially have disabled customers.
Yep, absolutely. You have to prepare for both customers and employees.
So
Okay.
they have a ramp. Not that I'd like to be going up that ramp when it's horrible and raining, but they have one,
When I
right?
first had my first commercial office, I instructed them to make my door 38 inches wide and put it in there. The guy said, "Well, how many people in wheelchairs do you expect to have?" I said, "Even if I had one, that matters."
Yeah.
This is one of the things that when you have an attitude and make your business disability friendly, right, like to customers and possibly workers, like who knows, one of them may apply for a job.
Okay, so what if like you said 38 inches is the width of a wheelchair, I'm guessing.
Yeah, to get through a with a power chair through a
Yeah.
door.
Yeah. Okay, so
Comfortably.
what, for example, if you went to let's say somewhere like Subway or McDonald's or something like that, I'm not picking on any one of those, and
Any
you can't get
to
the
a
wheelchair in the door.
franchise. Actually, they're trying to do they're trying to do not too bad with their washrooms. Hey, some of
No,
the
I wasn't talking about washrooms. I was talking about even getting in the door.
getting in the door. Yeah, some of them are pretty like the older ones. No, hey, but the new ones, like the one on Fourth Avenue, is pretty good.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
but to go
Yeah.
into that building, like you have to go to the one on Fourth Avenue, but there may be an older McDonald's somewhere else that you may not be able to get into. But I think this has to be something that's originally over time where people are going to say, hey, this needs to be changed, this needs to be changed. And gradually, maybe they're going to have to change the commercial building code to say this has to be done.
Well, I was thinking about that when I saw a commercial building the other week, and one of these commercial looked like absolutely lovely offices, narrow staircase, and no way for somebody in a wheelchair to get up. Even a fat person might have trouble getting up those stairs. I thought, right? Um, and and hey, how would you get a disabled person up to the second floor?
Exactly, unless you're going to be using a stair lift or something.
Well, it occurred to me that actually you could possibly so long as you could kind of redirect some space, could you have an exterior lift that actually allows them up and goes in, which was closed off? But you could only do that, for example, if the building's got ample room out the front of it. It's not going to work if the the sidewalk is literally right outside your door.
Exactly. And this is where a lot of people, when they go into these things, they say, oh, well, I'm not disabled. I can walk, I can drive, I can do everything. So I don't need to accommodate anybody with a disability because I don't have anybody coming in here with wheelchairs and I don't employ anybody in a
Okay.
wheelchair. So, I mean, that kind of attitude, people have to change their way of thinking because more and more people are going to become disabled. And
Okay, let's look at the question.
Your employees, your boss, everybody.
So let's look at the question about what are accommodations. Let's get that.
Yeah.
Defined.
This is where there is a duty on the part of employers. Okay, let's get into the employment part. So say, for instance, somebody applies for your office and they have some disabilities. Okay, maybe they're not very obvious, and they come into your office and you cannot ask them questions. You cannot say, do you have any disabilities? No, you can't ask them questions like that. But sometimes you can say, is there anything that I should know that would require accommodations to help you do your job? Okay? Anything I should know.
Again,
which may not necessarily be a disability. It could be something.
I was just going to say, that might not be a disability.
I have a dying mother and I have to go look after her, or I have or I have an autistic child, or I have or I'm a Muslim and I need to pray 5 times a day on Fridays.
Yep. And or the other thing is that, hey, I have a hearing difficulty with my left ear. So if I'm going to be answering the phone most of the day, I need a headset.
Yep, you need a specific headset, which will allow me here with monophonic sound on my one side, and it might make it easier for me. And it has to be on a headset. Okay, and those are not that expensive to get.
In fact, actually, I have a headset that I take to every job that I go to. I just take it home with me every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that works. Just hook it up to your phone. Try it out on the phone.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work on the phone, the employer can get you one. Okay? Yeah. You know, these things are not that expensive to get. So these are things that we look at. But then say somebody comes into the job and they haven't told you about any disabilities. And then it later becomes a problem where Johnny's very slow at work. He's not answering the phone every time it rings. Sometimes he just lets it go. And he's supposed to be answering the phone, supposed to be keeping up with the phone. And he's not answering the phone. There's something going on. Okay? How you address it, you don't go up there and say, Johnny, you're not doing a very good job. You don't do that. You say, Johnny, is there something that I can do for you? Okay? Is there something going on that I should know about?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because that brings up a perspective that a lot of people need to consider. Johnny might have been around in the job 20 years. He's never had an issue until now.
Yeah, and there may be some issues going on with him. Maybe he's getting migraines.
Yeah, or exactly, or something else, or maybe up until this point, he's had no problem. And the good employer should be probably the one who says, Johnny, do you have a problem? Because I notice you try to avoid using this ear. All right. Mm-hmm. You never pick the phone up and use this ear. You're always putting it over to this ear.
You're putting it on your shoulder, and that's not necessarily going to be good for you after a while if you keep going your shoulder like this. You know, so I mean, it's always good to try to say, you know,
the point being,
that would make this easier.
And the point being about that,
try a hands-free for a while. Would that help you?
Yeah, okay. Well, I was going to say the point being with that is that maybe the hands-free might help them, but at that stage they don't even know that they've got a disability potentially.
Yeah.
And the good employer is the one who basically says, "I think you've got a problem with your left ear. You should go see a hearing specialist," right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean to say you're going to get fired. That just basically means to say that you've got
to address it and adjust it as to the person. Okay, And if there's something that goes on for a long time, somebody has some really specific issues, they're not coming into work, or they're coming into work late all the time, or there's something they just seem to be sort of totally out of it. Okay? Yeah,
So Robert says he has that issue that Peter mentioned, I think the hearing one. And I
yeah,
said that because it's the simplest one to understand. In my case, I can hear both on the phone and or with a headset.
yeah, absolutely. And these are things too. And if the person constantly was on the phone and they were doing my reception, I would try to look at that to see, to monitor that, just to make sure the person feels comfortable doing it and that they're able to do this the way they would if
Well,
they did not have the hearing issue.
and one of the challenges about something like the phone is that you have that tendency to lean over or lean into the phone call, or not sit straight, and you're doing you're doing things like typing with the phone in your ear, right?
Yeah, and putting it on there. That's why I either put the phone on hands free where it's speakerphone, or I put a headphone on it.
Yeah.
And these are things that where we need to like look at that. So that's one type of accommodation. Other types of accommodation deal with scheduling, flexibility, and accommodation, where people could come in early, stay late, or they could even have a period of time where you have a room where they can lay down for a little while. I
Okay.
once had a person who had narcolepsy.
We had
They
a client
couldn't
came
sleep
in.
all the time. Eh?
Yeah, we had a client came into the other day, and she had a light sensitivity.
Yeah. So what I did is we tried to darken it a little bit to close the door, and she felt better after that. And we try to accommodate as much as we can, although I think she probably would have been better accommodated in the library.
Yeah, and actually, that whole point about that is that sometimes you need to move people around
Yeah.
in order to make that accommodation, right? So,
Mhm.
it's all about knowing, knowing, you know, and knowing what they need. And when you think about it, probably the vast majority of people who are accommodated, you talked about the 38-inch doors for wheelchair access,
Yeah.
but probably the vast majority of disabled people in Canada or in Ontario probably don't even have a wheelchair.
Yeah. Most are not. Most are not even visible disabilities. Like if you have lighting in your ceiling, you really need to have non-reflective lighting.
Yep.
People who take epileptic seizures, you have to be careful around that because reflective lighting can create problems with that. And also be very careful about the colors that you paint your office with, and how they might reflect lighting. So things like that, you have to be careful of. So these are things where you have to make things that are disability friendly. And also, if you're looking at important things like your door handle versus your door, um, any kind of table you have versus a chair, that type of thing, there needs to be some contrast, some color contrast that makes sense.
Yeah.
So a person who may be low vision would be able to make sense out of that.
Well, and actually, the trouble is that I was thinking with things like low vision. I told you the story about this blind gentleman that I went to bar school with, right? And I was terrified with working with him on it before doing a particular project, and then I was assigned to work with him, and I said to him, quite frankly, I don't know how to approach you, because I have one of my greatest fears in the world is to end up being blind, right? And he told me about what it was like to be blind, and we became the greatest of friends afterwards, because it
Mhm.
was about that knowledge about how people work, how you deal with that situation, that becomes an important factor in living with people that have disabilities. And when I say living with, I don't mean I don't mean married or whatever. I mean living, working, etc., with people who have that.
Yeah, because like if you have someone here, we have in our own Ontario province, Dave Lepovsky. He's the head of the Ontario Action AODA Action Alliance, where he is trying to impose accessibility all over the province. Every time there's something there, they just built a multi-million-dollar courthouse in Toronto, and it's inaccessible.
Yeah.
The brains behind this.
You would think that they would put an accessibility committee together with every public works thing that is done,
Yes.
right?
And follow what they say, because people who have knowledge about accessibility issues can report on these things.
There's another one in that regards, right? One of them is that when we walk into a washroom and we're stood up, we're used to the level of the sink being at this kind of level, right? I'm being an inch or so out, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And when you're a disabled person, hey, really?
That's why you need the sinks lower in washrooms.
So you need to have now the sinks at a level that a disabled person can use.
That they can just reach out and use it like that, so it's not so it does not so they don't have to go like that.
But the challenge, of course, is that the stand-up sinks that were up here, the logic behind them is to allow a person to kind of reach out with their hands at a particular height and wash their hands easily. But of course, that doesn't take into consideration the wheelchair user.
Yeah, and this is one of the things, because traditionally, people with disabilities were not to be seen or heard of.
Yeah.
Okay? Everybody just thought they belonged in institutions, and that was the best place for them, or in their homes somewhere, and not necessarily out in the workforce, not out in public, not out there doing their banking, doing their shopping, going out and talking to people, or even seeing legal counsel. I mean, this is
even being legal counsel.
Yeah, but nowadays we have people who are legal counsel who have disabilities.
I want to actually
doctors who are disabled. We have a lot of people who are disabled. And the thing is,
I want to add one to that list.
What?
I want to add one to that list.
What?
Right. David Blunkett, who was the Home Secretary for the UK, was blind.
Yep.
There you
go. Carla Cottrell was the first disability minister in the Liberal government that we currently have. She was blind too, and a Paralympic as well.
A Paralympian.
Yeah, so Paralympian. So it's interesting, hey, that she had an interesting background, and that she was a human rights lawyer.
Yeah, yeah.
So when people start developing these types of things, but we still have a lot of people in our society. Many of them are employers. I don't want to hire people with disabilities, as I don't have confidence that they can do the job just as well as other people. Right? And this is based on a belief that's back then, when people with disabilities weren't seen and weren't heard. Okay? So what you do is, I deal with this all the time. Is there something that about you that I need to know, that I would need to know to assist you in doing your job on an equal basis with others? Okay? And I don't care whether it's because you're a Muslim and you have to have Fridays, or if you're a woman with a small child and you have to keep regular work hours, or if you need to have some time where you can work at home a bit, do a flex time. I don't like these things. You work out on an individual basis, on an as needed basis with people.
Yeah.
Right.
And part of the trouble, of course, is that people don't want to get into individual deals, do they? And that's part of what we have.
They don't, because they keep saying, this one's getting special treatment. How come I can't get the special treatment?
Yeah. The other one, of course, is that whole concept that I'm not going to employ a disabled person. And the truth of the matter is,
most of them don't.
Yeah. And the truth of the matter is that employment, if a disabled person came in the door and, in a job situation whereby pretty well all of the candidates are identical and equally capable, there's a high likelihood that an employer, and I wish we could have found some statistics on that there's a high likelihood that an employer would not employ the disabled person, even though they might well be number one or number two on the list of, of the candidates that were interviewed. And
with me, I'm totally blind on it. I'm blind to race. I'm blind to disability, blind to gender identity. I don't really care. Can you do the job, and will you deliver for me?
And that was actually and that's a very, and the thing is, if you're an employer and, for example, you make the decision not to hire a visually disabled person, you probably ought to have a good reason for it.
Yep, and you better have a good reason, because if you're discriminating against them, there has to be, and you cannot accommodate them. You cannot say, I can't accommodate them, I can't work with them. You have to prove that hiring them and having them in your company would produce what they call an undue hardship. And creating an undue hardship is a very high bar. There's often public funding to help you. There's often some other simple solution or if it does, and it doesn't interfere with health and safety of your workplace, and it doesn't interfere with your business processes, like the more higher numbers you have, the more you have to hire that person with a disability.
Okay, so how about such things like, okay, you've hired, you've been a good person, you've hired a person with a disability, but it turns out that they're not quite as good as you first hoped. Maybe you've got to discipline them. Maybe they can't do the job as well. How do you handle that? And I'm not talking termination here. I'm just talking, the fact that you might have to discipline them in some way.
You always have to be careful with anybody when you're introducing a PIP or a performance improvement program. Okay? This is when you bring a person in and you're saying, okay, we notice that your numbers are down and we need to talk to you and how we can help you in bringing the numbers up. Okay? But you have to have some evidence of these things. Okay, so if somebody is doing something that's clearly lagging behind or slowing down the business, clearly unable to, for instance, they got social phobia, they can't talk on the phone, things like that, you want to find out what's going on.
Okay? So, for example,
that you're disciplining them for something that has nothing to do with their disability.
Yeah. So, for example,
disability, accommodate them.
Yeah. So, for example, you're a salesman amongst a team of 15 salesmen, and I'm your manager, and I'm saying, Angela, you were in the top 20% of sales. You've achieved you've achieved 200,000 for the last 3 quarters. But now your figures are more than 50% down. What the heck is going on? Right? Mm-hmm. Then there's obviously something that has to be done in that regard. So this is where the performance improvement program works.
Yeah. Then you work on a performance improvement. It's often done in writing, and a person would sign to it and commit to it. And you have a period of time where you go through it. And then you turn around in a few months' time, weeks' time, or whatever, and you reevaluate it to see if things have improved.
That, let's be honest about it, that works whether you're able-bodied or disabled.
Yep, but you just make sure you don't put your performance improvement programs on the people that are disabled or who have some reason to maybe be a little bit slow on the job or require accommodations that you won't give them.
Well, I was just going to come to that because, let's say that you're disabled, unlike your colleagues. So that means when you're going to the washroom, you've got an extra 5 minutes to get to and from the washroom. But I'm counting that time to and from the washroom into the statistics. How you score on the statistics. Mm-hmm. That would clearly be that would clearly potentially would disadvantage you.
Yep.
Right? Whereas if I didn't,
a person who has a wheel trans to get in or has to use the Parabus, They get in, pair bus doesn't always come on time,
Yeah.
right? That they need to, employer needs to accommodate and say, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to expect that person to show up right sharp at 9 o'clock every time. 9:05, 9:10 is fine. Right? And then we just make sure that that person can go out on time so that they can catch the pair bus home. So these things an employer has to watch. And it's becoming more complex, but many people do not want their work sites to be complex. But
Well, I was
working
going to
with
say,
people, you have to think you're working with people. And every person has an individual situation. You have the single mother who's
yeah,
working in accounting. You have the blind guy who's working in marketing.
yeah.
You also have somebody else working in dispatch who may have a psychiatric disability. So these are things that you have to look at and say everybody, is you keep the workplace in a situation where people are able to work and understand. The hiring person who hires and knows about the disability, if there's a supervisor involved, they know how to accommodate. They may not necessarily know all the disability details about the employee, but they know what they need to do to accommodate them. So it's a type of way of working with somebody.
But again, let's be honest about it. Irrespective of disability, every person is different, right? Because even if you're talking, normal non-disabled people, and therefore they're all employed to answer the phone. One of them may pick his phone up in the morning and wash it over with a tissue, and
Mhm.
that whole ritual might take 5 or 10 minutes before they even start work.
Mhm. There are people like that, so I just put something on their desk there where they can use it to clean themselves, wash themselves, and that sort of thing, if that's how they feel, that they need. Because we want to make sure people are at their most effective.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Same as so, well, it's like the same thing too. Like sometimes it's not necessarily disability, but it's like software. Certain things that Peter comes up with for software that I'm supposed to use, and I don't know the dang first thing about how to use it. So,
You will learn, otherwise I will get the whip out.
so we do things that kind of thing we work with. I've hired many people with disabilities before. I've hired different people of different cultures and races, people of different sexual orientation, identities. Never bothered me.
Yeah.
They just do the job in the way that they can. And if they needed something, we would try to work that out about how to make the job more palatable for them. Okay? And what I don't tolerate on the job is if somebody becomes a bully. Workplace bullying is something that often happens when somebody is of a different racial or ethnic group, or sometimes if you're in a very male dominated job and you happen to be a woman who's doing that job, or if you happen
Okay.
to have a disability and you're in certain types of fields where people may be mocking you. And
Okay.
so
So
that type of thing would not be acceptable because generally what I do is I go after the bully and end it there.
okay. So here's a big question, and this is one that I think is a tough one to answer, irrespective. Promotion, right? You get in a workplace, you've got three people who are up for promotions. Three people are interviewed for the job. Joe thinks he's the right person for it. He's been groomed by the old manager. Mary thinks likewise, and Joseph, who's the new employee, but he comes from a different firm where he's got much more practical knowledge greater than both the other two candidates. Each one of those are going to start complaining that, hey, the promotion was fixed. And here we're just talking about employees. I've not added to that whole concept anybody with a disability.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, too, promotions also have to be handed out on an equal and equitable basis, whether with a disability or not. Right.
Hmm.
So these are things when we talked about when I was doing the AODA accommodations with the AODA Standards Development Committee. We set standards. Even when you get down to writing a job description, you have to make sure you're excluding anything that might be terms that would leave out people with disabilities.
Okay.
Like if you don't require any heavy lifting for your job, or somebody can task switch, for instance, and do the occasional part, you do not put that in there. Do not put anything in the job except what is absolutely necessary. And
Okay. So, not working knowledge of Punjabi when you only speak to 1 in 100 people who speak Punjabi, or 1 in 1,000 people that speak Punjabi.
yeah, exactly. Like, say, what if your boss is Punjabi, eh? You may be able to familiar yourself with Punjabi culture, if you're in a neighborhood, say in Brampton.
Wherever.
Yeah,
We get enough. We got a few. We got a few Punjabis now in
a lot of our clients are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we try to familiarize that if there's something I don't understand, we talk, hey? We try to understand how it works for them,
Yeah.
what something works for them, what success looks like for them, to work with them on that so that we accommodate them. But to say somebody who comes in here, they must be able to speak Punjabi, I think that's, maybe only 1 out of 100 or 200 of our clients only
Well,
speak Punjabi.
and then the question becomes actually, well, how many of your clients actually don't speak any English,
Yeah,
right?
very few, extremely
And
few.
probably, yeah, and probably it may only be 1 in 500,000 that
Yep,
speak no English. So,
yep,
do you really need a Punjabi speaker to do
yep.
that job?
And sometimes we can get people with different languages, different skills, and who could maybe communicate and facilitate, particularly if we have a large cultural community, right, in a particular area. Like if you're living in the middle of Chinatown and you're working in Chinatown,
Oh yeah.
and you want to have somebody who's Mandarin, Cantonese,
Well,
you want to have somebody who has that type of knowledge to be able to integrate these people.
Well, I was going to say one of the things that I've worked with a lot of Indians over time, and I know, for example, how native Indians from India, utilize the English language, and very often I've had colleagues of mine say, I can't understand what Abdul is saying. I sit down with Abdul for 5 minutes and I understand exactly what he's saying because I understand how they utilize the English language and the words that they miss out and how to interpret how those words operate within the English language and how countless times I've been used to communicate in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because I have a special relationship with India, I guess, probably more so than any other subcontinent, other than the English speaking world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just happens to be that because I happen to have an intimate knowledge of that area, of how those people operate.
Yeah, I mean that's
Can I get it wrong from time to time? Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely, because not all of them are the same way.
Yeah.
And then there's subcultures.
Oh yeah, exactly. And here we're just talking about differences in people, not differences in how, for example, how disability applies. Right?
Yeah, disabilities are very complex
Yeah.
because people with different types of disabilities respond to things in very different ways.
Absolutely.
But it's very important to try to respond to the disabilities the best you can, to assist that person in performing as much as you can.
Yeah.
Because what the problem is, you saw the statistics, far less people with disabilities are even working.
Yeah.
And among those that are working, more of them are part-time than full-time among
Yeah.
the people who are not disabled. And among those who are disabled, compared to those who are not disabled, they tend to make less money. And
That's another issue. Yeah.
yeah. And the problem with it, it costs more to have a disability. Okay? And you don't want to have, like, people with disabilities do not want to live on state benefits like ODSP, CPP, or anything. They want to, most of them want to work. But the problem is, among those that can work but are looking for work, many of them are having a hard time finding work. And then we have employers who say, we don't want to hire people because then I have to upend my business and do everything differently. And it's not necessarily that you have to do everything differently. You just make some changes that are not necessarily upending your business,
Yeah.
but can actually make your business a lot more functional.
Okay, so let's get on to the hardest question of the night, because many people will say you absolutely don't do this, but in some circumstances you must. How do you terminate a disabled employee?
You can terminate a disabled employee the same way you terminate anybody else. But you have to be careful that you're not terminating them on the basis of anything that has to do with accommodation or lack of accommodation or a disability issue. You're not terminating somebody because, like I think I explained on a previous Spin Legal episode about the EJCA case with Paul Lane, where he was terminated because the employer suddenly found out all the stuff and said, oh, you got bipolar, you can't take stress. And we suggest that maybe it was a mistake in hiring you. And this guy took it back to the Human Rights Tribunal and won.
But that's clearly a disability related issue,
Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly. But if the guy goes on the job and he slacks off on the job, regardless of any
Yeah,
accommodation,
and that's
or
you know,
that's when you start letting them go.
yeah, and slacking off on the job or being incompetent on the job
Yeah.
or being downright rude on the job or
Being rude to customers,
whatever.
stealing money. You don't have to be disabled to steal. You could be perfectly able-bodied and super competent, but if you're starting to steal, that's just cause for dismissal.
Yeah.
Like these things, like could happen to anybody, and I think that what people have to realize, especially among employers, they said, "Oh, I don't want to hire a disabled employee because if I ever have to terminate them, I'm going to be years long in litigation."
Well, I was going to say, I was going to come to that because, in fact, if you're terminating a disabled person, I think probably the common view out there is that in order to terminate that disabled employee, you would actually have to terminate with cause. And without cause is, probably 99% of people are terminated without cause.
Yep.
Right. But if you're going to terminate a disabled employee, there's a public view out there that you must find cause, because without cause, you could end up in litigation.
And you just have to be very careful that what you're terminating them for has nothing to do with your disability. You've come to the end of your accommodation rope. The person still has not been able to perform up to expectations. Document, document, document. Right? And have that person have some input, do performance improvement program. Failure to pass that, then you document again, then you go again. And then after that, you get the written warning, then you're done. Okay?
Then again, for a person who was able-bodied when they first started working with a company, who becomes disabled after time, for example, they're getting older, and that old war wound or football injury from 25 years ago, it suddenly means you can no longer use your knee in the same way anymore.
Oh, yeah, like Peter has a bad knee.
That becomes, that potentially could become problematic, couldn't it? Because in fact, that person may not have been accommodated correctly.
Yeah, it's true. And you might need to look at that and have it reviewed. And then you suddenly send him back to the stock room and he picks up a box and then he hurts his back. Uh-oh. Looks like we have a WSIB injury going on.
Yeah.
And then you have to send them back. And WSIB sometimes say, oh, he always had that injury. But he did not have that injury to the point where he was suffering from such pain and disability that he wasn't able to do this until now.
Yeah, exactly.
So we need to rehabilitate him to a point that he can do this, or we need to find something else for him to do.
And one of the worst aspects about finding something for them to do, for a person to do, is how that seems to be a make work project. You know, hey, cleaning tables in the dining room. Yeah, you can't
Counting
exactly
toothpicks.
clean. You can't
Counting
exactly.
toothpicks in the restaurant.
Yeah, you can't exactly clean tables in the dining room all the time from, you know, from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. when lunch hours were over at 1 p.m.
Yeah. These are things we have to be careful of. Like if somebody had, especially for WSIB, because WSIB is so eager to get everybody back in the workforce. And then when you get people back in the workforce, they say, okay, we have to make sure, because the person was doing physical labor prior to. Person cannot do physical labor. They got bad back. They got
Well,
a lot of problems, migraine headaches. But now we're going to be counting toothpicks.
well, as I said, why, you know, for example, I used the example of my mechanic brother-in-law, who when he was disabled, they couldn't figure out something else he could do, but yet he spent inordinate numbers of hours at home playing with the computer.
Yeah.
Well, if he can play with the computer, he can certainly do another job.
Yeah, somebody can train up to do
Job.
something with computer programming, social media
Well,
marketing.
I don't think he would have been one for a computer programmer. As a computer programmer, he couldn't figure out. He couldn't add 2 and 2 together, right? He'd add 2 and 2 and make 8.
Or he can even do graphic design or what
Well,
desktop
yeah,
publishing.
that kind of thing. Yeah, those kinds of things, fair.
Yeah. So
Who's
these
to
sorts of
know?
things, you get them trained, but get them into a marketable occupation. There's a lot of people who try to get people into occupations that aren't marketable. Like at one time during the 1990s when there's a lot of unemployment. And then all of a sudden they have this program that's offered at a community college for everybody to become a butcher. Okay? So they just train 900 butchers through the program, and then you might get 100 people getting a job, but the rest of the 800 people are trained as butchers, but they can't find work.
It's all right. I'm going to come and butcher you, okay?
So, I mean, these things have to be dealt with. There has to be some rationality, some work done on these things, getting people into education. Hey, there's not enough support for getting people with disabilities into education. It's a higher educated they are, the more chance they will in terms of getting better employment and sticking to employment.
Okay. Okay. So I think that's been a fair run through with the questions about disability in the workplace. Any more gems of wisdom?
Gems of wisdom, just kind of look out. And as I said, always prepare, for these things. Everybody keeps saying that they won't be disabled, but many people will be. Never say never. Right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that a lot of people that I know, who deliver service, say, well, I don't have to be in an accessible building. I don't have to live in this because I could walk, I could run. In fact, run half marathons. And okay,
Yeah,
that's nice. But the problem is people who come to you, people who work for you. Not all of them can.
Here was the thing, right? Winding the clock back from my own life. Many years ago, I was one of the fastest runners in the city, and where I lived, I was one of the fastest runners in the county in the whole of England, actually. And I used to also do race walking, and as a race walker, I was probably one of the fastest 200 people on the planet walking. Now I'm probably amongst the slowest 200 people on the planet walking.
Slow walkers.
Yeah. So I can't race walk anymore. I got a slow walk.
Oh, Peter.
Right. Anyway, so if you've got an issue, then we'd be happy to speak to you at Invictus Legal LLP. And you can call us on 905-688-5598. You can email Angela at weareinvictus.legal and me at peter@weareinvictus.legal. Or you can go to the website on weareinvictus.legal. So HTTPS, weareinvictus.legal. There you go. And Angela's favorite part of the show is about to come now.
Okay, Peter, where is it?
Oh, It didn't come up.
Oh, there it is.
It went away. Oh, hang on.
So what you heard today on Spin Legal and any of our other shows is not legal advice and is not to be construed as legal advice for any specific situation you have or any questions you have. If you have such a question, a legal question, or something that pertains to your own situation, you need to speak to a paralegal or a lawyer individually and perhaps retain them for your situation. And if you would like to have us talk about any specific topic in the future, write down in the comments or send us an email. Talk about what you'd like to hear us talk about, and we'll set it up and we'll talk.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay. And we thank you for being here and have a great week. And we'll see you next Wednesday.
Take care, Robert.
Bye.